After e4, e5, knight f3, and knight c6, bishop b5, the Spanish opening is in the board. Okay, we go on with f5 as mentioned in previous videos. In this video we're going to go through d3, one of the main moves, and as we know we have to take. After white takes back, we play knight f6. So in the previous videos we went through a lot of different options. Now we're going to go through knight to c3, one of the most popular of course. How to react to this? Okay, we immediately pin the knight, bishop e4. The idea is simply to take the knight and double up and isolate the white pawns. Three options we're going to explore now. One of them is bishop development, pinning our knight. The other one is bishop taking our knight with the free pawn in e5, and bishop to d2, protecting the integrity on the pawn of the pawn structure. Okay, so let's start from bishop takes knight. Now here we take with the b pawn, and after queen to d3, protecting the pawn in e5 so that we can't take it with a double attack on the knight, and also preserving the integrity of the pawn structure potentially, we play a5. This means one thing. It means that we don't care about our pawn in e5 getting taken, and also we want to play bishop a6, which is there to attack the queen, but even you can still play bishop a6 anyway to stop the opponent from castling. The white player will not be able to castle due to your very strong bishop. So let's say the knight takes the pawn for real. Okay, bishop a6. And this is going to be game over soon. You're going to play queen e7, attacking the pawn in e4. White will not be able to castle. If white plays something like knight c4 so that he can castle, maybe remove the queen somewhere else later on, it's just too late. You simply play d5. The knight is pinned, so you're going to win a piece. Counter-attacking obviously doesn't work because simply knight to e4, the knight in c3 is pinned, win a piece for free. Bishop takes c4 is going to be free. White can't really play b3 to protect the knight simply because we got double attack c3. And here back a few moves ago after a5, quickly point out that castling is just not possible because bishop e6 is already a winning move. There's no compensation for the exchange lost by white in this position. That means that the white player in this variation will not be able to safeguard the pawn in e4 to win the pawn in e5 for free, or safeguard the integrity of the pawn structure with queen d3. So let's make a recap and let's go through the last line I'm going to show. Bishop to b5, f5, d3, pawn takes, knight f6, knight c3, and now bishop to b4. So this variation we're going to look at is bishop to g5. It's basically the variation where we can take the knight, and we should. In fact, without hesitation, we take the knight, pawn takes back, and we create this damage. Now, how this doubled up and isolated pawn? Now, how do we capitalize on that? Well, it's not like the game is already over, but we're going to work on that weakness forever. So white has no reason to play like that. After d6, creating the nice pawn chain and castle, few best moves by the opponent and see how to exploit this weakness that has been created and now cannot really be fixed. Bishop to e6, developing, and after rook a to d1, these are just symbolic moves. They don't necessarily have to happen, and they don't have to happen in such order, but they will most certainly happen in a very likely order. But the point is, you know what to do in your opening. You will try to recognize as many setups as possible and patterns. They will show up again to you. So don't try to memorize the moves. Just try to memorize the patterns and how to clamp on the weaknesses. Anyway, black goes on with queen to e8. Let's see a few more setups and how they look like before we close this video. The queen wants to reach squares like g6 or maybe f7. Let's look at knight to h4. That's a potential idea. White might want to play f4. There's another idea of playing knight f5, which is thematic in the e4, e5 games for white. Okay, this is not a poison pawn to take, so you just go ahead and take it. Knight to f5 now. Looks like a very well placed knight, and it is, but you're going to play bishop to e6. Best move now would be f4. This idea of playing f4 comes by the fact that the white player will want to put the rook on an open file. This is definitely the best variation, the most solid that white can possibly play against the Schliemann Gambit, yet it's still better for black. So it really tells you a lot about how amazing this gambit is. Best is to take the pawn in f4, and after the rook takes back, ready to double up. It really looks like white is doing fine. Black now goes on with knight to d7. The white player really didn't want to take our knight in this variation because obviously he created a long-term weakness by doubling up and isolated the c-pawn, so he might as well just keep the bishop pair, also because the game is open. If he were to actually have swapped his f6 is g5 bishop for our knight in f6. That would have made us even happier. Besides, it's fine when the queen moves to e8, because if that's what the moment where the bishop decides to take your knight, you can just take back with the rook on f6. Okay, let's look at another idea now. For example, knight to d4. Obviously, the white player wants to take this amazing bishop. Also is putting double attack on the knight. So there's two attackers in c6. And at the same time, if we take, white will be able to potentially reunite the pawn structures and get rid of that weakness. Black plays the crucial knight d to e5 move, which was the very reason why we went to d7. Knight to e5, putting double protection over c6. And the knight cannot be removed from that square because white cannot attack it with a pawn. Best move by white is rook takes. Obviously, we can't take with the queen because then knight takes the bishop and we're losing. King takes back, and after rook to f1 check, king simply goes back. There's nothing. Knight takes bishop is obviously the worst move in the world. Just take back, and white has an isolated pawn and double isolated pawn. We were never going to do him the favor of reuniting the pawns, of course. White playing rook to f5 now with the idea of playing bishop to f4 and put as much pressure as possible on this knight. You just attack the bishop, a6, bishop a4, and now knight to a5 should do the job, because this one of the other motives of this weakness in the b pawn and the c pawn is that the bishop doesn't have a retreat square here. It's going to take too long to play c4 and then c3 for the bishop to stay alive. So after bishop to f4, but either way, you're going to play b5. Nothing changes. If bishop goes to b3, best thing to do is simply take it. White doesn't have the bishop pair anymore. It takes you back. And now knight to d7. Black is up a pawn. Has got better pawn structure. Going to easily win the endgame. Even then, after b5 attacking the bishop, if white had taken our knight first, hoping that we will take the bishop in a4 and get a double isolated rook pawn, which is pretty ugly, we don't do it, we just take back. And yes, we now have an isolated pawn, that's true, but we still have an attack on the bishop. The bishop can't stay there because yes, we will damage our pawn structure, but we will go up a piece. So bishop will have to go to b3, only move, and now we take. And here we also win another pawn. White can take our pawn, but then we take another one. So we are going up 2 pawns. White has a passed pawn, but it's isolated, it's weak. We have 3 connected passed pawns. Positions are evaluated around -4. So I think we can close the line here, and make sure to like and subscribe so that I can bring more of this content and we can make our repertoire wider. I'll see you next time. Okay, the second line is the one with bishop to d2 to preserve the integrity of the pawn structure. Okay, d6. And after the bishop is attacked, how do we continue? Surprisingly, we take the knight. And obviously that's because we're going to take in e4. So now bishop takes back, these 3 pawns are still alive, and we win a pawn, knight to e4. Now you might argue that this pawn is not forever because white can try to do something. Let's say, okay, white can't just go on and castle, okay, because then he will do exactly what we wanted. There's no compensation for development or anything. If anything, white just gave us what we wanted, which was this doubled up isolated pawn and gave up the bishop pair. So that was definitely the stupidest move that white could have played. So in this position, if the bishop goes back to d2, then you take it, and you take the bishop pair away from your opponent. Our opponent, though, this time in this variation has been able to preserve the integrity of the pawn structure. So after queen takes back, now black goes on with queen to f6. We're going to be castling soon, and also, well, we want to start putting pressure on f2 anyway. So after long castle, let's look at this type of scenario. Well, black goes on with bishop to d7. We're not particularly happy about bishop takes and pawn takes in a situation like this. h4, so now we're just looking at best moves by both players. a6, and after bishop to a4, of course, if bishop takes and bishop takes back, we just up a pawn, and our pawn structure is safe, and this bishop, I mean, it's an open endgame. This bishop has no reason to give itself up for the knight. Black goes on with rook to f8, and after bishop to b3, best place to put the bishop. Let's see how to take it from here. h6, so these are kind of like silly little moves you have to play to put your opponent in some sort of zugzwang. It's not like any zugzwang can possibly happen because white can just play this, for example, king b1, king c1, king b1, king c1 forever. So of course it's never going to be a real zugzwang, but these are little plans. What's the plan with h6? As we all know, the idea is g5, and if take, and then queen takes back. After a swap of queens, we end up with a rook in f2. If instead the pawn doesn't take back, we can play g4. The knight will move, and then we are going into f2 anyway.
So after white playing h5, best move basically stops that from happening, because then you can just take in g6 with achieving nothing, and also gives white the possibility to think about knight h4, knight g6, but none of that is going to happen. The game is compromised already, has been for a while. Black simply long castles, and knight h4 idea cannot happen because of the lovely bishop g4 move, which wins another pawn because of the double threat. Knight g6 isn't going anywhere, because after all the swaps, you're going to be able to get into f2. So from the same variant, another move we can look at is queen to d5, which is usually the main move in such positions. So d3, take, knight f6, knight c3, we pin it immediately. And after bishop to d2, d6. Now when the bishop is attacked, take the knight. Bishop takes back, and now take the pawn in e4. So the main move here is queen to d5, because now there's double attack on the knight in c6. Oh, why the hell are the arrows blue now? I have no idea how this happened. Anyway, there's double attack on the knight, threat, very strong threat, and there's also an attack on the knight in e4. So how are we going to get out of this? Simply knight takes in c3 with an attack on the queen. Taking back with the pawn is terrible, because black will just play bishop to d7, putting double defense over the knight. We just won a pawn and damage the pawn structure of our opponent with no compensation whatsoever. We're going to play queen e7 and long castle. It depends also on what white does, but that just gives black a very easily win in the endgame. In this position, after the knight takes the bishop in e3, the best move will be bishop takes e6 with check, pawn takes back, and now queen takes back with check, ready to take the knight back. And it looks like for real, the white player in this variation will be able to go to the endgame with a fine pawn structure. Black goes on with bishop to d7, developing and protecting the king. Queen takes the knight. Okay, castle. And now, did the white player manage to play a normal game? Well, black has got slightly better chances, because we have a rook on an open file coming, targeting b2. We got better center, and it's an open end game, so we got our bishop against the knight. Black's first move now is king to h8, just to stop annoying checks. Prophylactic move. And let's see how to take it from here. Now, of course, any move like rook a to d1, this looks like very normal moves. Just lose immediately to bishop g4. Double attack on the knight can't move. You're going to break everything in here. You can even add pressure. Queen f6, for example. So that's not how to continue for white. White playing this type of move, rook f to e1, looks better. Black's best move is a5. Let's see how to play the endgame from now on. White cannot push any of these pawns, and can't really move the knight without leaving weakness on f2. So for example, b4, the idea of swapping stuff and activate the rooks, doesn't work because of queen to b8. Now taking here in a5 is terrible, because white will have an isolated pawn in the c file and two isolated pawn on the a file. They're not going anywhere. Black will always be able to just put the queen up and then just take the pawn and simplify the endgame. So after rook a to b1 with a threat of taking, in this case, well, now we have to take. And there's no good way to take back here. Let's say you take with the pawn. Okay, queen to b6, the idea of doubling up everything. After queen to b3, black plays rook to f4, and now we're putting more attack over b4. We also want to play rook b8. Our center is completely safe. Our king never has to worry about anything. White playing the best move still, like c4 for instance. You just play bishop e6, pinning the pawn. This is not going to work. If white plays g3, attacking the rook, then you simply take the pawn, attacking the queen. Best move is queen to e3, but then you just swap everything. After rook takes back to protect the knight, obviously rook to f7 is the best move. This pawn is successfully isolated. The center is just fine. And either way, in this position, even if white plays anything else like rook e to c1, which is the best move, black doubles up. The idea maybe bishop g4, putting more attack. Especially, we could also play queen to b6 to put more attack over f2. Best moves rook to c3, putting more support. Still, black plays bishop to g8, since the bishop was loose. We're threatening to play e4. So rook to b2, since we're playing e4, the knight will have to move the rook. But still, it's just a compromise endgame. I'm just showing it so that you try to remember as many setups as possible. Knight to e1, even the best moves doesn't matter. Rook to f2 is the winning move in this position, but the endgame was already compromised for quite a while. In this position, just to mention, rook activating, you might be wondering what happens if white tries to play more active. Okay, then queen to a7 is mentioned before, we're exploiting this isolated c pawn. And after a4, playing all the best moves for white, still doesn't work. Queen to a5, pinning the rook, rook to a1. We also got lots of attackers. Oh my god, now the arrows are red. Why? Okay, anyway, black plays c5, attacking the rook. It looks weird because the pawn in d6 now is backwards. But after rook to b3, now we swap. Queen takes back. and now we can take the pawn for free. There's no compensation. Even after take, rook to d3 now to attack the backward pawn is not possible because of e4 winning the piece.